Hej, witam Was na moim kanale Vintage Music Geek. Zapraszam Was na pierwszą odsłonę mojej rozmowy z Riciem Lee, czyli perkusistą legendarnego blues-rockowego zespołu 10 Years After, który zasłynął przede wszystkim z tego, że jego liderem, gitarzystą, wokalistą był jeden z najszybszych gitarzystów rockowych wszechczasów, Alvin Lee. Zespół zasłynął przede wszystkim swoim brawurowym występem na legendarnym festiwalu Woodstock w 1969 roku, gdzie zagrali 11-minutową improwizowaną wersję kompozycji Alvina Lee I'm Going Home. Inne znane kompozycje zespołu 10 Years After to m.in. piękna ballada I'd Love to Change the World, czy inne blues-rockowe klasyki takie jak Love Like a Man, czy I Woke Up This Morning.
I woke up this morning. My baby was gone.
Ponadto Ric Lee w swojej karierze miał też epizody w takich zespołach również legendarnych blues-rockowych jak Chicken Shack czy Savoy Brown. 10 Years After, który istnieje z przerwami od 1966 roku, nadal występuje oraz właśnie pracuje nad nową płytą, a Ric Lee jest jedynym członkiem oryginalnego składu, który nadal z nim współpracuje. Niezmiennie zachęcam Was do subskrybowania i wspierania mojego kanału na YouTubie Vintage Music Geek. A tymczasem zapraszam Was na pierwszą odsłonę mojej rozmowy z Riciem Lee. Miłego odbioru.
10 years after, I have now a new lineup from
That's correct.
last year. So, what can you say about the people that now in the 10 years after? What can you say about them?
Well, we're a fantastic group of people. We're getting on really well together. I was quite surprised how quickly it came together. The bass player, Craig Fletcher, well, bass player singer, was recommended to me by several people. He had a very good pedigree. So I hooked up with him, and I was going to use a younger guitar player than the one we've got now. But I don't know, I think the guy probably thought that the responsibility of basically running 10 years after or carrying up the front was probably a bit too much for him, so he sort of faded out. So Craig said, "Oh, it's okay. I know a guy who's really good, Sam Lees." So we got hold of Sam and we had a jam together, the three of us, and it was really, really good. Very impressed. And they both sing, so we now have two vocals, whereas before we never did. Although on the original records there were quite a few harmony vocals. I think Mike Vernon used to do those. Sad to hear that Mike Vernon, he died. He was 78, I think. So anyway, he produced our first three albums for Decca. And he went on, of course, to produce Fleetwood Mac, the original band with Peter Green, and John Mayall's Blues Breakers, and all of those. He was a good man for opening up the blues in the UK. Anyway, so Sam came in. Sam, really good. As I say, we now have two vocals. They're very good at harmonies, the two guys, so that works well. On things like Hear Me Calling, we do that, and they harmonise on that. I think Good Morning Little Schoolgirl, they share the vocal on that as well. And then we didn't have a keyboard player, so Sam said, "Oh, I know a really good keyboard player, Dave Burgoyne." So we got in touch with Dave, and he came along and had a jam with us, and he's fantastic. He also plays violin, so we have another sound in the band as well now. Because in the set, when we normally do about an hour and a half on stage, and we do in the middle of the set we do 3 semi-acoustic numbers where we all come to the front of the stage, and Sam has an acoustic guitar and his microphone, and Dave has the keys where he normally is, because we can't move them very easily. And then I'm sitting at the side of Sam. As we're looking at the stage, you have Craig. Craig is on the left, then there's me, then there's Sam in the middle, and Dave's on the right. And we do 3 tracks from the first album, actually, in a semi-acoustic fashion. And the first one is Portable People, and that was our first single. We weren't really a singles band, but Decca kept saying that they needed a single, so Alvin came up with the Portable People song. And Dave plays violin in that, so we've got a really new dimension already in the band. And then we do 2 others, we do Don't Want You Woman, and Losing the Dogs. So then they've all got little stories which I tell people about on the stage. We do all the classic stuff, Hear Me Calling, Good Morning Little Schoolgirl, I'm Going Home, of course. What's that? I'm trying to think what the one is we start out with. I'm Coming On, we do, that's the opening song. So they're all from the catalogue, but we have 3 songs that are partially written, ready for a new album that we hope to release this year. But because we're doing a UK tour, which is the first tour that the band's done in many, many years. We're co-headlining with a band called Clearwater Creedence Revival, which is a bit of a tribute band, but we were asked to do it by the leader, who we know well. And I thought it would be good exposure for the band. Hoping to get a French tour together towards the end of the year. And I've been talking to somebody else about going back to America. So we've got a lot of stuff that's happening. I mean, the album is an important thing, of course, because that'll tell a lot of people what we're doing. And I think it's going to be quite different as well.
On what stage it is now? The new album.
At what stage?
Yes.
Well, we've written the songs. We're still writing stuff, and we're gonna start recording as soon as we can. There's just a few more little tweaks that need putting. We've got 3 songs that are basically ready to go, and what we'll do is that I'll do the drum track. We did an album with the previous lineup with Marcus Bonfanti, Colin Hodgkinson, and Chick Churchill. We did an album called The Sting in the Tail, and for that we wrote it all together, and then we had everything ready. We rehearsed it together, all the songs, and then Colin and Marcus put down their guitar and bass parts to a click track, and then sent that to a friend of mine who has his own studio. He's one of those people who can play everything, drives me crazy. He can sing, he's a drummer, he's a bass player, a guitarist, keyboard player, you name it, he'll do it. Mark, his name is Mark Pullen, is very, very good. So I went down there and played, we had the click tracks and the bass and the guitar part, and I put the drums to that. I knew all the parts that I wanted to play because we'd rehearsed them all. And so we put them down like that and then sent the tracks back to Marcus, Colin and Chick, and they put their stuff on. And it worked really well. And so the plan is probably to do the same thing again. Whether we use Mark's studio, I don't know, because there's a studio. We're all in the same area of England. We live. The other guys live north of Manchester. I'm to the east of Manchester. Dave is actually to the south of us, but he's happy to travel. So there is a studio. Craig's son runs a studio. We may well record the album there. We're not sure yet.
when I talk with musicians, the interviews I'm doing with musicians, they telling me about some jam sessions they doing during some festivals with the other bands. And I heard the story that you play with Jeff Beck, with Vanilla Fudge. There was some kind of jam session when there was few drummers, Carmine Appice, John Bonham, and you. And
that was no, what that was. That was it was in New York, at the not Shea Stadium, right next door to the Shea Stadium, 12,000 seater, and the headline band was Vanilla Fudge, which my old friend Carmine Appice and Tim Bogart. Sadly, Tim's passed away now. I saw Carmine a couple of years back, actually, when we were in the States. We played together again, in fact, come to think of it. Did a couple of gigs in Florida, which is where he lives now. That show, as I say, they were the headliner. Jeff Beck was the first support. I think we were like third on the bill, and the opening act was, I think it was the Staple Singers, if I remember rightly. So anyway, we went on and did our set, and then Jeff Beck, and he had Rod Stewart vocal with him, and Ronnie Wood on bass, and I think it was Mickey Waller on drums. Certainly we'd done quite a few dates with them in UK. In fact, Jeff asked me to join the band when we were in the UK, but 10 years after I had too many dates, it was at a Christmas show in Oxford at the university, and he said, how'd you like to join the band? And I said, well, very flattered that you asked me, but I'm going to be too busy with TYA. I can't just walk out. It's not my style. And also, I'd heard that Jeff changed his drummers as often as he changed his trousers. So I don't know how long that would have lasted. But later we became very good friends because we lived near each other down in Kent. And there's a funny story actually with Jeff. I'll tell you about the gig in a minute. But the funny story with Jeff when we lived in Kent was we invited him and his young lady, who was Celia Hammond. She was one of the top models in London at the time. And they lived in Jeff's little cottage about a couple of miles from where I lived. And we invited them over for dinner. And he said, oh, by the way, that'd be great. We'd love to come. He said, but we're vegetarian, which in 1967, or whenever it was, 68, was unheard of. I mean, people hadn't heard of vegetarians, So we thought, oh, God, what are we going to cook? So my wife, my first wife, went through a cookery book and she said, oh, I found this, how about this eggs Benedict, which was poached eggs with spinach and bechamel, I think it's bechamel sauce. So anyway, we did that and they loved it, and we had a great evening. And the next morning, Jeff rang me and he said, wanted to thank you for last night. It was fantastic. He said, any chance we can come back again tonight? And it turned out that Celia hardly ate anything. She was a model. She was staying skinny. And I think poor old Jeff was living on cheese sandwiches or something like that, So anyway, we got on great. We were good friends, although we never worked together. And in fact, when he got together with Carmine and Tim, they came over to England and they came down to Jeff's place, and I invited them over to my place for drinks and snacks, And so they came round to my house and very impressed with it all. So I had a big house in those days. So anyway, back to the gig. So the gig was at next door to the Shea Stadium, 12,000 seats, so I say. And when Jeff, not when Jeff finished, during Jeff's set, Zeppelin turned up. So there was Jimmy Page, Robert Plant, John Bonham, not John Paul Jones. He tended to be quite private and not hang out with the rest of the band. anyway, they turned, and I think at that time, Chick and Jimmy had become very good friends, and I think Jimmy was maybe thinking of adding a keyboard to the group, so he may have approached Chick about that. I don't know exactly. Anyway, the show went on, and then when Vanilla Fudge finished, the band got a great. I mean, every band had gone down really well with the audience. You know, they were all crazy about the show, and I was standing watching a few things, and as I did, Bonham came running past me. He said, "Yeah, come on, we're going to jam," and I went rushing off to get on the stage. So we all ran up to the stage. Bonham got on the drum kit. He wasn't wearing a shirt. It was a very hot night. He just got trousers and shoes. And he started thrumming out a rhythm on the drum kit. So Carmine and I dashed on, and we grabbed a floor tom each from the other kits and put it either side of John. And we were all bashing away on the drums, playing the rhythm. I think somebody said in an interview somewhere it was Jailhouse Rock, but I have no idea, I can't remember. But so we had two vocalists. We had Rod Stewart and Robert Plant. We had two lead guitarists, Jimmy Page and Jeff Beck. And we had three bass players. We had, who did I say earlier? What was the guy's name? That played with Vanilla Fudge. Sorry?
Tim Bogart.
Tim Bogart, thank you. It's memory. And then somewhere, Glenn Cornick from Jethro Tull turned up, so he came on stage and was playing bass as well. And we had Ronnie Wood on bass. So we had three bass players, three drummers, two singers, and two guitar players. And we did, anyway, it went down an absolute storm, you know, and the crowd wanted us to do another song. So Bonham started to play again, but before he got going, he decided he was going to take his trousers off and his underpants and play naked, which was typical of Bonham. But the police had seen this, and Richard Coles, who was the tour manager, and Peter Grant, who managed Jeff Beck Group and Zeppelin at the time, they both saw what was happening, so they ran on stage, and as where Bonham was sitting on his stool, they put one arm through each of his arms and lifted him bodily off the stage, off the drum kit rather. And the last thing I remember was seeing Bonham's hairy arse disappearing in the follow spot.
Yeah.
So that was a great evening.
Had it been recorded, maybe? Had it been recorded, this show?
I'm not sure. It could well have been recorded by somebody in the audience, I think. Yeah. It wasn't recorded. I don't think it was recorded officially, as it were.
Can you recall anything like that show because you, of course, you wrote the book, but can you recall anything like that? Any anecdote from this kind of jam session, like you told me just now? Anything?
Well,
like
that was the biggest. I mean, I used to get up and jam with people in different places we were playing. You know, I can't honestly remember the names of the bands that I sat in with. We all used to do it. It was a bit like the old jazz days, you know, when people, the jazz players in the 30s and 40s used to turn up at other bands' gigs and ask to sit in with them, you know, which of course they did. And it was, I know, yes, I remember one. There was a place in New York called the Scene Club, which was set up by a guy called Steve Paul, and he started it as a late night drinking place for people who worked in the theatre. So if somebody working in a show on Broadway or wherever, they would then turn up at the Scene Club and have a few drinks. You know, and it really that was the audience. It wasn't really open to the public. Anyway, after a while, rock bands started turning up there, and they sort of then catered to the rock bands because that's the way that everything was going. You've got to remember, at this point in time, this in a sense was the beginning of blues and rock in America. I mean, they'd always had the blues, And we kind of took it back to them. We listened to people like John Lee Hooker and Muddy Waters, and then all the English bands took it back. So anyway, we used to go down there, and we were playing there. We did 3 nights there, sorry. And then the other venue in New York at the time was the Fillmore East, which was run by Bill Graham, who'd started in San Francisco with the Fillmore West, and we played both of those. But he wasn't too worried about the scene club because it was very small, and it also was on the opposite side of New York. The Fillmore East was on 2nd Avenue, downtown, and the scene was up on, I think it's 46th or 47th Street and 8th Avenue. So they were a long way apart, so they weren't going to affect the audiences. Anyway, we were playing there, and we were going down very well. The place was busy, and at some point, Jimi Hendrix turned up with Mitch Mitchell, Larry Coryell, jazz player, Rick Derringer from the McCoys, as it were, in those days. And then he went on to join Edgar Winter. They asked if they could jam, so they all got in and jammed, and I played a couple of songs with them. Jimmy wanted to play bass, not guitar. So he borrowed Leo's bass, and because he was left-handed, he just turned the bass upside down and played it upside down. Quite incredible. Anyway, it was going on, and then I'd done a couple of songs with the new band, as it were. And then Mitch Mitchell said, could he sit in? And I was really quite pleased because I'd been playing for a couple of hours already that night, So, and it was getting on to about 2 a.m, maybe later. So Mitch sat in for a couple of songs. I stayed and listened for a while, and then it all sort of degenerated into a bit of a free-for-all, which is a problem if you're not careful with jam sessions. Or everybody's out trying to outdo each other, crazy. So anyway, there was a groupie there called Cookie. All the groupies used to come along because of the rock musicians being there. And she and her girlfriend were going for breakfast up the street. So I said, oh, can I join you? And they said, yeah, not a problem at all. The problem I had, though, was I hardly had any money because we were on what they call a per diem. We had I think something like $10 or $15 a day, and that had to buy you dinner and drinks and whatever. So anyway, we went up and had breakfast, and then went back to the hotel, obviously. So the girls went home to wherever they lived. The other thing about the groupies was you'd see, not just the groupies, guys as well. You'd see them, for instance, outside the Fillmore East, and they'd be saying, spare change, have you got spare change? That way they could then get money together and buy food or whatever they needed. But the bizarre thing was they never appeared to have any money. But quite often, you'd fly to California to do a gig, and they'd already be there. They'd flown from New York, so I don't know where they got the money from for that. But that's roughly how it was in those days, anyway.
When you talk about your influences, yeah, because you say often in the interviews, Buddy Rich, Gene Krupa, yeah, these two drummers, of course, and Joe Morello, of course. But anyway, you are mostly connected with blues, and for example, such blues drummers like Oddie Payne, Fred Ballou, Willie Big Eyes Smith, Sam Lay, these drummers that work with Muddy Waters, with Willie Dixon, also inspired you some way, or is it always was like that? Buddy Rich, Gene Krupa, or Ringo Starr, you said also, and the guy from Hollies. What do you think about these drummers?
No, I wouldn't know them. I was very heavily into the jazz players.
Okay.
Art Blakey was another one.
But if you listen to the blues songs, you didn't think about who played drums on this song?
No, not really. I just listened to the jazz players and tried to emulate them and put it into what we were doing.
Okay.
And Alvin was very good jazz player as well. You know, a lot of the stuff he did, he relied on that. You know, it was Barney Kessel, who was a big fan of, and George Benson, before George Benson became very commercial. Who else? I mean, yeah, he. I don't know as well. He'd met Big Bill Broonzy, was on tour in the UK, and his parents, Alvin's parents, lived in Nottingham, as did Alvin at the time, at his parents' house. And Big Bill Broonzy came to a venue that that Alvin's parents went to. It's called the Dancing Slipper, and it was on the other side of the River Trent from Nottingham. It was in a place called West Bridgeford, and they used to go there to see these acts. And Broonzy played there, and they asked him if he'd like to come back to their house for a drink. And he said, yeah, he'd enjoy that, you know. So they took him back, and Alvin was pretty young then. I think he was probably about maybe 10, 11, but he was in bed, but he was allowed to get up to see the great man. And Broonzy sat on the living room floor with a large whiskey and his guitar and played a load of stuff. And I think that's when Alvin really caught the blues styles, you know, from seeing Broonzy at close quarters like that. But he was very well. Well, if it was a book, you'd say he was well read. But you know, he was very well ensconced into all the players, guitarists, blues players, whatever. You know, I was more into like Ringo Starr and Bobby Elliott and those people initially as a drummer. Although one of the first drum records I bought was I can't remember the title of it now, but it was Buddy Rich and Gene Krupa together. So I used to listen to that all the time, you know, and try and play what they were playing.
It was this
sorry.
There's drum battles. It was before.
It was called Burning Beat, but I mean they played together. You know, they weren't. And there's a clip which I show my pupils. I do a bit of teaching nowadays, and the pupils I show them Buddy Rich, Gene Krupa sort of drum battle, which was on the Sammy Davis Jr. show on American TV, and that's pretty good. And we played Buddy Rich. I met Buddy 3 times. One time I had to follow him at Fillmore West. Bill Graham decided he was going to put Buddy Rich's big band on. We were headlining, so I had to go on and follow Buddy Rich, which was not. I did the first night I chickened out. I didn't do my drum solo. But the second night I thought, oh, the hell with this, I've got to do it. So I just shouted, Buddy Rich, watch out, and did the solo, you know. And I met him again in New York. The limousine driver we had at the time was a guy called Doc Lawless, who was Jamaican. But he'd been Buddy's band boy with the big band, and his job had been to set the band up, you know, with the music stands and take the suits and get them clean, you know, and pressed, and do all the stuff that you do looking after a band of that size, you know. So he said to me, we picked us up from the airport, and he said, Buddy's in town tonight, do you want to go? I said, oh, it'll be brilliant, yeah. He said, right, I'll ring Stanley. When Stanley was Buddy's manager. And Buddy had a place on 3rd Avenue called Buddy's Place. They'd opened this bar come venue. We went along to that, and I think that was the best I ever saw Buddy play. He wasn't doing all the histrionic solos, you know, because he didn't need to. It wasn't a big venue. And I think it was a quintet, so five players. Had Anthony Jackson on bass, actually, who was the #1 call in Los Angeles for sessions. And then there was a keyboard player. I don't know who that was. It was so bass, keys, and Buddy. That's 3. And I think there were 2 horn players, sax and maybe trumpet. and it was very, it was very close, very intimate, and Buddy played brilliantly that night, and he did quite a lot of stuff with brushes, because the music warranted it, yeah. And he went down the storm. I had a chat with him afterwards. He was very, very good, very polite, very nice. And the last time I saw him was he had the big band at Ronnie Scott's club in London, and they were going to do a TV show later. Anyway, the band finished. It was a great show, and I was with some friends. I said, I'm just going to go see Buddy, and I went to go to the backstage dressing room, and one of the guys from the band was coming out. I said, is Buddy around? He said, yeah, he's in there. Just go ahead, you'll be fine. So I went in and sort of knocked on the door and walked in, and Buddy was sitting there on his own. And I said, hi, Buddy, it's Rick. We met in New York. He said, get the fuck out of here. So that was the last thing I got from Buddy.
You also play with such bands like Chicken Shack.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but you left after 1 year, I think, this band. So why was like that? Yeah.
Well, I'd never looked at it as being a sort of a life situation, where I was going to stay forever. I made a deal with Stanley. Stanley had a drinking problem, and I said to him, if he was ever drunk on stage, then I would be out. I mean, I enjoyed a drink afterwards. So I never drink before I go on stage, but I always enjoy a few drinks. In those days, it was beer. I mean, nowadays it's wine. But Stanley could just get very, very silly when he was drunk, fall over and all sorts. So that was the deal I made with him. I said, if you're ever drunk on stage, then I'll be out. And we played a place which is a very popular, large pub in Fulham called the Golden Lion. And we played there several times on a sort of, I think it was a monthly basis, and he had a lot of rock bands and blues bands on there. Anyway, that was Stan Webb's Chicken Shack. I mean, Christine Perfect had moved on after she'd had the hit with I'd Rather Go Blind, joined Fleetwood Mac. And then, anyway, Stan was running his own band, basically. We had a guy called Paul Butler, who was the guitarist singer with a band called Jelly Bread. He was very, very good. He and I got on very well, and Paul tended to hold everything together. And I had a young bass player that I knew, Alan Scott, invited him to play. And we rehearsed some of the stuff. A lot of it was was jammed anyway. So you get, as was all the 10 years after stuff, and still is. You start with the beginning and the end, and then the bit in between is anybody's guess. It's like, see you later, guys. See you at the end. And there's little cues that bring you back to the songs and stuff. But yeah, Stan was drunk one night. He actually fell off the stage at the Golden Lion. Luckily, it wasn't a very high stage, so he didn't damage himself. But they had to carry him off to the dressing room. So when we got there, I said, I'm sorry, mate, but that's it. I'm out. I said, the deal we made. Anyway, I got a phone call from his manager the next morning and said, Stanley's really upset and very, with what happened, and he promises he'll never do it again. And I said, well, I'm not interested. I mean, he promised it before. Anyway, I decided I would go back one more time, but and in fact he was incredibly, if you like, well behaved. After that, he was really good. He never got drunk on stage again. There was one time in Sweden where he'd got a new guitar being given to him by a company that was trying to promote the guitars. I can't remember the names of them, but the guitar just would not stay in tune. We did 2 sets, and the first set was just like, it was hopeless because Stan just had to keep stopping and tuning the guitar. I mean, it wasn't like it was slightly out of tune. It was dropping out of tune quite seriously. So he eventually he ended up, we came back in the dressing room and just threw the guitar across the room, which it broke, of course. The neck came off and everything. Luckily, there was a spare guitar. And, I had sympathy with him. I couldn't, what could you say? He was doing his best and he just dodgy equipment. But that was the only other time he got a bit drunk before we went on for the second set. But he played great in the second set, so,
With Savoy Brown, yeah? This the second band, blues, so we can say blues rock band, that it's also in the same style. Savoy Brown.
Savoy Brown, yeah, that was Kim Simmons.
Yeah, you also play with.
I did, yes. I did a European tour with them. And that's when we got 10 years after back together again with Leo and Chick and me. And then we got a guy called Joe Gooch on guitar and vocals. I'm just trying to think with that. Yeah, that tour was with, I got a phone call actually from I did the tour with Kim and Nathaniel, the bass player, big black guy, great guy, great player as well. And the promoter said to me, "What's the chance of 10 years after?" I said, "Well, I don't know. We'd have to find out, because I don't know what Alvin is thinking about or whatever." Anyway, Alvin wasn't interested. And I said, we can't use the name because the name is owned by the four of us. So anyway, we went out with this guy. You got this guy called Carvin Jones, who was from Arizona, and Carvin's claim to fame was he played two guitars at once. At the end of his set, we went down and stormed. He was a very, very good showman. So I did the dates with those. I helped this promoter. I said we could do with the drummer, and I said, "Okay, what's the deal?" So he told me. I said, "Yeah, go on, I'll give it a go." And then he said, "What about 10 years after?" I said, "Well, I don't know, but we'll need to talk." I think I'd phoned Alvin, and he said he wasn't interested. And then I got hold of Chick and Leo, who, funnily enough, were both in America at that time. I didn't quite know what they were doing, and they said, yeah, they'd like to give it a go. So we went and we backed Carvin Jones for several, I can't remember how many days. And then we went out and I persuaded Leo and Chick that we could use the name 10 years after. And we have, and we've used it ever since. But there was a legal agreement drawn up between us. And so we were able to use that.
Was there any chance to reform the original band after Alvin left in 2000? It was 2003 or 4. I cannot remember exactly the date. But was it any discussion about it before Alvin?
Well, yeah, I asked Alvin a couple of times, but he didn't want to do it.
Okay, he wasn't interested.
Yeah.